All right, so we're at the sparge process right now. We've had a sacrification rest going for close to an hour. We were at 149. We held it at 149. At this point now, I've readjusted my pumps. I've taken now the pump from the mash tun. Is going to be going straight into our second pump, and it's going to be pumping right into the boil kettle. And then we've got over here our hot liquor tank. The hot liquor tank, we're going to be taking the hot water and we're going to pump it right back through our heat exchanger again. It's going to wash all the wort out that's left in there, and it's going to go back up on top of the grain bed as it starts to rinse the grain bed. The key to this right now is to match both flow controls coming from each of these pumps. So I generally just start with the destination pump, and I'll turn it on very lightly so that it starts to slowly flow into the boil kettle, and then I'll go ahead and I'll start to add water back from the hot liquor tank and then use the second pump to control that. I'll head over to the boil kettle, I'll take a look inside, and I'll try to just watch how quickly the wort is flowing in here. So when I'm sparging, I try to match my flow rates, and it's important to do that. That way you're not exposing your grain bed, and you're also able to keep a more consistent temperature in your mash as you're rinsing those grains. And I always try to keep an eye on both of them, just so that I'm going as slow as I possibly can, so that I'm extracting as many of the sugars as possible. So I'll keep an eye on my boil kettle, make sure things are still flowing. Every once in a while, a little bit of grain might get clogged up in the pump, so I'll have to control those valves and just make sure I keep an eye on it. But it shouldn't take much longer than maybe 30 or 45 minutes more from this point. Alright, so we've got our boil going. We've actually already done our first hop addition. It was a 1/4 ounce of Hallertau Mittelfrüh. We do that at the 90-minute mark, and then I'm going to add some more hops at the 60-minute mark. So we're just about at the 75-minute mark. I ran inside to grab my yeast starter. This is a 5-liter flask. It's basically what I use for most of my yeast starters. I actually did a 2-step starter on this one, so started it about 3 days ago just to make sure I had enough viable cells. I'll go into some of the nerdery side of yeast, just in case it might help some people out there. But a lot of times homebrew shops or people will just tell you, just grab one of these pouches, and all you got to do is take that yeast pouch and dump it in, and you're going to have beer. You really need to make sure that you do some good calculations on your beer. Where I start is I pick up a yeast packet. I'll pick it up. I'm fortunate here, I live in San Diego, so I can go grab a yeast packet from White Labs. Normally they're pretty fresh, but even if they're not, you can still make sure that you're going to have enough yeast. So what I do is I start out with my yeast packet. Down at the bottom you're going to see a lot number. I don't know if you can see that on the video, but you've got a lot number down there as well as a manufacture date. So the most important thing to start out is to find out how many viable cells you have in your package. What you do is you go to yeastman.com if you're with White Labs. If you're using another manufacturer, I don't know what to tell you. I've always used White Labs. It's a great product. You start out at yeastman.com, you input your lot number, and switch it up to your home brew pouch, and then hit view the QC report. And what White Labs does for you is fantastic. They'll tell you how many billion cells of yeast you have per milliliter for this specific batch. What's nice about that is that depending on different strains, the cell size could actually be larger or smaller than others. So you really get specific by checking that lot number. Once you get that number, you can multiply it by 40, which 40 billion cells, or you have 40 milliliters in here. They give you a count once again of billion cells per milliliter. So on this one here, you've got about 40 milliliters. So you want to multiply that number by 40, you're going to get your total count. Now you also want to put in the manufacture date on your yeast calculator. Go to your yeast calculator, put in the manufacture date, and then you're going to be able to determine how many billion cells you have. On this packet here, I had 46 billion cells viable, so I had to start from 46 billion and then work my way up to what my target was. On this beer, it was a little over 300 billion cells. So I did 2 steps just to use a little less of my dry malt extract, which is what I use for my starters. Any wort will work, but anything from 1036 to 1040 is generally best. But yeah, so At this point, I already decanted. I poured off the yeast starter wort that I had used, and in there I've got all my cells ready to go. So hopefully here within about another hour and a half, we'll be. Alright, so we're getting close to flame out here. We're just approaching the end of a 90-minute boil. I've already added my heat exchanger into the boil kettle so that it's just going to pasteurize. And then at this point I've hooked up our hoses. I've put some groundwater in my hot liquor tank, so I'm going to use it as a, I guess, a lukewarm hot liquor tank. It'll just basically start to knock down the temperature a little bit for the first step of cooling. I'm going to pump the water straight out of my hot liquor tank. It's going to go right through our heat exchanger, and then I'm going to collect all my water on the other side into some kegs just to make sure I am able to reuse that water. But we're just about there, and we're going to knock this thing. Alright, so we're all cooled down. We're ready to start pulling off our luscious beer. All I have here is just a sanitized paint strainer bag. I throw it over my funnel just to try and filter out any of the little bits of hop that might come down. I did do a whirlpool for a while, so most of it is probably settled towards the center of the boil kettle. But at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and start racking off the beer and putting it into the fermenter. Everything's been sanitized. We're all ready to go. I got it down to about 55 degrees because it's going to start heating up a little bit. It's a hot day. We're probably going to be up to about 58, maybe 60 by the time that we get it over and we get the yeast pitched into it.